Reflecting a little bit further on the legacy and the contribution of Don Mattera, I'm now joined by historian and Professor Pitika Ntuli. Prof, good evening, and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight on In Focus. First and foremost, what does it mean for you at this time to speak of this revolutionary lyricist, Don Mattera, as having passed away? What does it mean to lose such a giant?
Don was a very powerful poet. I would like to start with one of his poems. The poet must die. His memory threatens their survival. His breath could start the revolution. He must be destroyed. Burn him. Send him to the island. Call the firing squad. But remember to wipe his blood from the wall, crush the house, kill the neighbors. If their lives are to survive, the poet must die. We're talking here, I am mourning, but I'm celebrating. Here is a person who started, from there being a criminal and ended up being an icon whose very major thing was to serve, to suffer, to sacrifice. That's what he was as an Africanist, and it reminded us.
Yeah.
He had gone through a lot, but what he loved more than anything else, he loved children. Mm. And also why he loved children, it is also because he said to me one time when we were talking, there are no intergenerational conversations, in our country. How is our future going to be? How are our children going to be? Pregnant women being murdered, children being killed, that's what really concerned him, greatly. Because compassion was his middle name. When anybody mentions compassion, it always comes over to him because he says, without compassion, with all the zeal that we have, we cannot achieve anything meaningful.
For you, why do you think his work occupies, in your mind, but also in the minds of many South Africans, such a prominent, isolated, and maybe even exceptional position within the body of literature?
It is because the words that he used in his poetry derived from the struggles of the people, the suffering of the people, the dreams of the people, the hopes of the people. And so he was taking the words from the people and giving them in a very refined manner. That is one of the reasons why he was so loved. I remember when he came to London, when I was in exile there, and then he came up with his wife, and we were all sitting in the house. The first thing he said to me was, I didn't come here for whatever you think the newspaper said. I came in here just to check if your poetry is still good enough to make people uncomfortable and also to make those that are this and heavy. But before he left the house, we ended up quarreling because he was so much in love with my wife. He was so much in love with my wife, he wouldn't want to listen to him. I said to him, listen to me, why not listen to my wife? Then he said, women are the people that understand. Yeah. They build relationships. He could joke about anything, ever serious actually it is. He was a man full of laughter. And you cannot be full of laughter if you are not full of love.
Yes, yes. As a scholar yourself, Sitoto, in one of his numerous reflections, he laments the fact that Don, as famous as he is, in terms of the South African scholarship, and particularly the literary scholarship, his work is particularly thin at this particular point. Why do you think that is so?
Because what you must remember is that some of the people that are in charge of those things are not the people that have been involved, in the struggles. Therefore, that means they cannot actually even begin to understand what he was. I would liken, those people like the apartheid regime that put Don for 8 years under house arrest. He could not practice as a journalist. He could not publish his poems. But I remember one stanza of the poem he wrote when he came out. that says, where was I, that I might emerge from the burning furnace of my spirit to call on an aggrieved people towards a rebirth and insurrection against these nocturnal beasts who guard our dreams and command our poems to kneel before their guns. So you do not expect some of our current academics to understand liberation poetry, liberation, kind of ideas. For them, there are things that are at a distance. But all over, wherever I go in Europe, people always talk about the Don Mattera. The incursions he made in France, in Belgium, and anywhere, doing poetry, still resonate with a number of people, including some of the poets who quote him.
Yeah. What are some of his critical views on the black consciousness ethos that you would remember that you've reflected on with him?
He had issues at the time with black consciousness, because he started with the Labour Party, then he was with the black consciousness movement, and then he ended up as an Africanist with it. He felt that they needed a lot of more practical action. Because if you remember, Steve Biko, Muntu Meza, Hoputse Tiro, were the people who lived among the people who went on to rural areas, to townships, to speak. He felt that maybe at that particular time, some of those people were not doing what they were actually supposed to be doing, and he got fed up with it.
Yeah. If there is any significant attention to be given to Mattera's way of thinking, way of life, what he was living for and what he was pushing for, I know you've mentioned children, I know you've mentioned women. What do you think would be a priority for him right now?
I think his priority, from now, it would be, as I remember my last conversation with him, he was lamenting the state in which our country has been, when a few self-seeking people, corrupt and all of the stuff, are doing actually their share. He always remember that we joined to serve, to suffer, and to sacrifice, not in order to make riches. That actually occupied his mind in the same way that it occupied Credo Mutua. We have got this kind of a thing here in South Africa, that we do not respect our legends. We only think of them when they are dead and say a few words and then forget and go and do what we want to do. Just imagine now, this thing can't get out of my head. In 1964, 4 Vulindlela brothers were hung. They were members of the PAC. They were hung. Imagine the parents. But there's not even a monument to remember this. There are no monuments to remember all of those people who made their sacrifices. And here is Brother Don here. Right through his 87 years, he devoted it to the love of the people, to the love of the children. How many journalists he promoted and developed and discovered, even some of them, when they were still exactly struggling. And I'm so happy that many of them, today who phoned me, remember him, very well.
Yeah.
That would have been up his own agenda, to change our country, to give our people hope, beyond a better life, for all. When in practical, purposes, everybody you turn to never says anything nice about their country. You go to America, they say, oh, you're from Africa, oh yeah, welcome to the land of the free, and so on. You get to England, they're going to boast about it. We are supposed to be the people with Ubuntu. That means that I am because you are, we are united, we should be there, we should share, we should think together and do all of those things, but we have not even promoted that amongst our own selves. So he might have died a very, very sad person. But nonetheless, because of the contribution that he made, we are not going to be spending time mourning, but we are going to celebrate that very brilliant life that he lived, the sacrifices that he made, the sufferings that he had overcome.
Yeah.
He has gone over now to his maker, a free man. No one is going to say, you stole somebody else's money, you corrupted this, you did this. Yeah. For that and more, we thank him, and we love him.
When you look at Don Mattera, or you mention the name Don Mattera, it's synonymous in a sense, as we've already mentioned, with struggle, with liberation literature. And there are many people today who are saying 24, 25 years later, we still have not enjoyed the fruits of this so-called liberation. Do you think the role of liberation literature is still relevant today, and there's still something that it can do and it should be doing?
You see, one of the biggest problems that we have done as in South Africa, we started with brilliant ideas. The RDP, we are going to nationalize banks, we are going to nationalize this. Until $803 million with structural adjustment things came, we had to jettison our RDP. We have not changed our education system. We have not changed our economic system. We have not changed, anything. Instead, we are still occupied by that coloniality, that stamp of oppression, where people still feel they are not different from those people that actually ruled, before. You'll find that many of the people, like me, for instance, have suffered more under the current regime than I did under the apartheid regime as an artist. So these are some of the stuff that we have got to live with, without bitterness, but with hope, and know that what we have done and what we are doing is correct. That's what Brother Don lived for. I can swear to that.
Prof, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us this evening. That's historian Professor Pitika Ntuli.